Have you ever boarded an airplane? And within minutes, that feeling of respect turned to cold suspicion. Naomi Brooks, a successful, poised black female CEO, just wanted to sit in the seat she paid for. But one biased look, one chilling comment, and one bad decision pushed her out of her rightful place. In that moment, she had only two choices: stay silent and let things pass, or stand up not with anger but with dignity. If it were you when someone looked down on you in front of everyone, what would you do? How would you react when your self-esteem was challenged in the place you thought was safest? This isn't just Naomi's story. It could be your story, mine, or anyone's story who has ever been misjudged because of their appearance. Join me on this emotional journey where one heartbreaking moment ushered in a sea of change. If you love stories that touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The morning Naomi Brooks left Denver for New York, the sky was that soft gray color she had always loved. Not gloomy, just quiet. A kind of quiet that made you breathe slower. It felt like the day was asking her to take her time even though her schedule said otherwise. Her flight was at 9:10 a.m., and she had a meeting at noon with the chairman of North Sky Airlines. A meeting that could change the direction of her company and maybe in some small way the whole airline industry. She pulled into the long-term parking lot in an old navy blue SUV. The paint was chipped along the edges of the doors, and the back bumper had a dent her mother had put in it years ago by hitting a grocery cart. Naomi always refused to fix it. It reminded her where she came from. Reminded her of her mother who used to work night shifts as a custodian at Denver International Airport just to keep the family afloat. Naomi stepped out of the SUV, straightened the collar of her tan wool coat, and took a slow breath of the crisp fall air. She didn't dress in designer brands. She didn't care for them. Her coat was simple, her shoes were sensible. Her hair was tied back into a low bun, and her luggage was a black leather duffel she'd had since graduate school. Nothing flashy. Nothing that announced she ran one of the fastest-growing tech companies in Colorado. But anyone watching her walk toward the terminal would have noticed something about her. Something still, something grounded. There was a dignity in her steps, a confidence that didn't need volume. Inside the terminal, she followed signs toward the priority lane. She pulled out her boarding pass, first-class seat, to a North Sky Airlines, and stepped into line. And almost instantly she felt it. Eyes. A pair of eyes studying her longer than they should. She turned slightly and caught sight of a middle-aged white woman standing several passengers behind her. The woman wasn't glaring. It wasn't that obvious. It was more subtle, the sort of tight-lipped curiosity that sat somewhere between suspicion and disbelief, the kind that said without a word, "Are you sure you belong there?" Naomi had felt looks like that her entire life. She felt them when she was the only black girl in her AP math class. She felt them when she bought her first house at 28. She felt them when investors underestimated her company simply because she was the one running it. She used to fight those looks, used to let them get under her skin. But as she got older, she learned how to carry the weight differently. She learned to breathe through it. She took one more step forward in the priority line. A man maybe in his 60s caught her eye. He gave her a small nod, the kind older men give young professionals when they recognize ambition. Naomi appreciated that. It cut through the static in her mind. She made her way to TSA, slipped off her shoes, placed her laptop in a bin, and went through security with ease. She had traveled enough that the process no longer bothered her. But halfway through putting her shoes back on, she felt another small ripple of memory, one she wished didn't surface so easily. She was 12, standing exactly where she was now, though smaller, skinnier, and wearing hand-me-down sneakers. Her mother had been cleaning floors near Gate C, and Naomi had wandered too close to the first-class boarding area. A young gate agent had snapped at her. "Sweetie, you can't be here. This area is for first-class passengers only." She remembered freezing, remembered the sting, Remembered her mother rushing over, apologizing, wiping her hands on her apron. Her mother whispered, "You belong anywhere you work hard to be. Don't ever forget that." Naomi never did. She finished tying her shoes and headed to gate B14. The gate area was already filling up. People in suits on laptops. A father helping his daughter with headphones. A couple debating which restaurant they'd eat at in New York. Naomi checked the time. Still 30 minutes before boarding. She sat down, opened her tablet, and reviewed the proposal she would present to Ethan Harrison, the chairman of North Sky Airlines. Her company, Brooks Innovate Labs, had built a predictive maintenance system using machine learning. It monitored aircraft engines and safety components in real time. It could save North Sky more than $45 million a year and prevent countless delays. It was the largest pitch her company had ever made. And she was ready. Or she had been until she noticed someone approaching the gate podium. A flight attendant. Her uniform was perfectly pressed. Her hair blonde and sleek, pulled into a bun that seemed engineered not to move. She walked quickly, not with urgency but with ownership, as if the space already belonged to her. Her name tag read, Rachel Miller, Senior Flight Attendant. Rachel scanned the area, her eyes sharp and assessing. Naomi didn't think anything of it until those eyes landed on her. They didn't leave, not immediately. They lingered with that same curious tension Naomi had felt earlier. Naomi looked back down at her tablet. She didn't want to assume anything. She hated assuming things about people. That was the very thing she didn't want others doing to her. A boarding announcement crackled over the speakers. "Good morning, passengers. This is the pre-boarding call for North Sky Flight 218 with service to New York. We will begin boarding our first class and priority guests shortly." People began to gather near the gate. Naomi joined them, boarding pass in hand. When the first class lane opened, Naomi stepped forward. Rachel was now at the podium. And the moment Rachel saw Naomi walking toward her, something in her posture shifted, her shoulders stiffened, her expression tightened by a fraction. But Naomi caught it. It was the same look she had seen 1,000 times, a look that measured her before she even spoke. "Boarding pass, please," Rachel said, her voice polite but clipped. Naomi handed it to her with a small smile. "Morning." Rachel barely acknowledged the greeting. She glanced down at the boarding pass. Then her brow furrowed. Naomi waited. Rachel looked at Naomi, looked back at the ticket, looked again at Naomi. "You're traveling in first class?" she asked. Naomi felt a small heat rise in her chest, but her voice stayed calm. "Yes." "Seat 2A." Rachel blinked slowly, as if sorting something out in her head. Then she scanned the pass again, and again. Naomi watched the pulse in Rachel's jaw tighten. She recognized that tension. She had seen it in bank tellers, in real estate offices, in conference rooms where people got confused how the boss could possibly look like her. Rachel handed the pass back, though her eyes still held doubt. "All right. You can proceed," she said, but the pause before the words was long enough to bruise. Naomi stepped onto the jet bridge. The cool air hummed through the tunnel. She held her duffel strap a little tighter. Inside the aircraft, another flight attendant smiled warmly. Naomi felt instant relief. But when she reached her seat in 2A and began placing her bag in the overhead compartment, she saw Rachel approaching again. Faster this time. More certain, as if she had just made a decision. "Ma'am," Rachel said, standing directly in front of Naomi, "I need to check your boarding pass one more time." Her voice was polite, but her eyes were not. Naomi handed it to her again, slow and steady. And in that moment, as Rachel stared at the ticket like it had betrayed her, Naomi felt something old, something she wished she'd outgrown rising in her chest. A quiet question she had spent years trying to silence. "Why is my presence always a problem before anyone knows my name?" Rachel looked up. And the story truly began. Rachel Miller stood there with the boarding pass pinched between her fingers, her posture stiff, as if something about this moment offended her sense of order. To an outsider, her face might have looked neutral. But to Naomi Brooks, who had spent years learning to read subtle shifts in expression the way others read weather patterns, the signal was unmistakable: doubt, and something colder under it. Rachel glanced from the ticket to Naomi again, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The cabin was busy behind them, passengers placing bags in overhead bins, seatbelts clicking, the muted hum of polite conversations. But the space between Naomi and Rachel felt strangely still. "Ma'am," Rachel said, her tone dipping into that familiar authority people used when they expected compliance. "I'm not sure this seat is correct." Naomi inhaled slowly, deeply, a method she had perfected over years of negotiating with board members, investors, and people who underestimated her before she even spoke. "It is correct," she answered gently. "2A, first class." Rachel's eyes flicked toward the seat again, then back. "Well, I'd like to verify this with the system. Please wait here." She didn't say please like an invitation. She said it like a warning. Naomi stepped aside, giving Rachel room to pass. Passengers from the next rows glanced over their expressions, curious but cautious. Naomi didn't meet any of their eyes. She kept her focus, steady, controlled, even though a soft prickle of embarrassment had begun spreading across her chest. It wasn't the first time someone doubted she belonged where she stood, but it carried a different sting each time. A man in the aisle seat of row 2 shifted awkwardly, as if trying to decide whether to say something. He was older, with silver hair and gentle eyes. He opened his mouth, closed it, then gave Naomi a sympathetic look instead. Naomi returned a small, tight smile. She appreciated the gesture even if no words came with it. Sometimes, silence was its own form of kindness. Rachel walked briskly toward the galley heels clicking against the narrow aisle. The sound echoed with purpose, as if she hoped each step communicated authority. Naomi took a breath and looked out the jet bridge window beside her. The runway stretched in a long gray line. A cargo truck rolled by. A ground crew member signaled to someone unseen. The world kept moving in its steady rhythm, completely unaware that Naomi stood there wrestling with the old bitter question rising inside her. Do I stand up for myself now? Do I push back? Do I let it slide like every other time? Her mother's voice surfaced again. Choose your battles, baby girl. But don't let the world choose them for you. She wasn't sure which choice this was yet. Rachel returned, holding a tablet in her hand. "Ma'am," she said sharply, "your name isn't showing under this seat's manifest." Naomi blinked. She stayed calm even though she felt the first twist of confusion in her stomach. It should be. The ticket was issued through North Sky's corporate desk. "Maybe try refreshing," Rachel stiffened. "I already checked," she said, clipped. "You'll need to take a seat in economy while I sort this out." The words were quiet but heavy. They landed like a stone dropped in still water. A few passengers nearby froze mid-movement. Economy. Naomi looked directly at Rachel, searching her face for any sign of logic or misunderstanding. But what she found was certainty, the kind built not on facts but on assumptions. Naomi's voice stayed soft. "My ticket is valid." "Well, something's not adding up," Rachel insisted. "Please move to a seat in the main cabin." A flush of heat rolled down Naomi's neck. She kept her breath steady, in control. But inside something trembled, not anger, not yet. Something more fragile, something closer to disappointment. "I booked this weeks ago," Naomi said, her tone low. It was confirmed. Rachel lifted her chin, her voice slipping into a colder register. "Ma'am, I don't have time to argue. Either you move or security can assist. We cannot delay boarding." That word, security. It was always the last card people pulled when they wanted to force obedience without justification. It wasn't a threat of danger, it was a threat of humiliation. Naomi felt a wave of memories crash together all at once, being followed in department stores, being questioned about credit cards that were hers, being told, "Ma'am, this section is reserved," when she had every right to be in that section. She could feel the old ache of it in her throat. Still, her voice stayed level. "I'll get my bag." She reached up gently, pulling her duffel from the overhead bin. As she lowered it, she could feel every set of eyes around her. Some were sympathetic, some confused, and some carefully blank the way people make their faces when they desperately want to avoid involvement. Naomi walked down the aisle, her posture straight, even though she felt a hollow burn inside her ribcage. Rachel followed closely behind, as though guiding a problem toward a solution. The walk to economy felt longer than it needed to. Too narrow, too slow, too heavy with the weight of something Naomi had hoped adulthood would numb her to. Rachel pointed to a middle seat in row 18. "You can sit here for now," she said, as if granting a favor. Naomi placed her bag beneath the seat. She sat carefully, quietly, without a word. Rachel turned and walked away, the fabric of her uniform brushing the aisle as she moved. When she disappeared behind the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the plane, Naomi let out a slow, steady breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. For a few seconds, she simply stared ahead. Row 18 smelled faintly of coffee and stale gum. The hum of the overhead vents filled the silence around her. A woman across the aisle offered a gentle, uncertain smile. Naomi nodded politely, though she wasn't sure her face fully cooperated. She rested her hands on her lap. They were perfectly still. But her heartbeat wasn't. A small, internal war began to form. Part of her whispered, "Let it go. Don't cause trouble. You have bigger things to focus on." Another voice pushed back firmer, "Silence is how things stay the same." A third voice, the one she didn't hear often but recognized as her truest self, asked quietly, "What example are you setting for the girl you once were?" Her throat tightened. She reached down slowly, unzipped the side pocket of her duffel, and took out her phone. The screen lit up her face, the reflection soft and pained. She opened her messages. Her fingers hovered over a familiar name. Ethan Harrison. She typed slowly, deliberately. She didn't dramatize. She didn't exaggerate. She simply told the truth. Boarded Flight 218. Was moved from first class without cause. No explanation beyond something isn't adding up. Just wanted you to be aware. She hesitated before hitting send. Her heart pounded once, twice. Then she tapped the screen. Message sent. A strange calm washed over her. Not relief, something quieter, like setting down a burden she had carried too far. She placed her phone back in the bag, leaned slightly toward the window, and watched the movement outside. Baggage handlers, fuel trucks, a group of pigeons scattering as a vehicle rolled by. Life indifferent and steady. For a moment Naomi questioned herself again. Did I do the right thing? Did I escalate too quickly? Should I have just waited? Her mother's voice returned like a soft hand on her shoulder. Your dignity isn't negotiable, baby girl. Not today, not ever. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she didn't look upset. She looked resolved. 7 rows behind her, near the galley curtain, Rachel chatted with another flight attendant. The two exchanged glances toward Naomi's row. Rachel's expression was smug, self-satisfied, as if she had fixed a problem only she could see. Naomi didn't react. She didn't turn her head. She simply breathed. Then her phone buzzed. She reached into her bag, pulled it out, and saw Ethan's reply. I'm handling it. Sit tight. Just 3 words. But powerful. Steady. Certain. Naomi exhaled, her shoulders easing just slightly. She knew Ethan well enough to understand what those words meant. Something was already in motion. And Rachel Miller had no idea what kind of storm she had just invited onto Flight 218. The aircraft cabin settled into that familiar pre-departure quiet, the kind that stretches just a little too long. Passengers shifted in their seats, scrolling through phones, flipping through magazines, adjusting bags under seats. But for Naomi Brooks, row 18 felt like a spotlight she hadn't asked for. She kept her gaze on the window because looking straight ahead meant seeing Rachel Miller's shadow moving up and down the aisle, and Naomi wasn't ready to face that again. Not yet. Her composure was steady, but inside her thoughts moved with a soft ache. She wondered how quickly the situation could have been different if she had looked any other way. If her skin had been lighter, if her clothes had screamed CEO instead of whispering comfortable traveler. She wished she didn't know the answer, but she did. A flight attendant came down the aisle with a plastic bin full of stray items, water bottles, headphones, unopened napkins. A young woman, maybe late 20s. Her name tag read Olivia Trent. She paused when she reached Naomi's row. "Ma'am, can I get you anything?" Olivia asked, her voice gentle but tinged with concern. "Water?" Maybe. Naomi looked up and saw in Olivia's eyes the softness she wished the rest of the world held on to. "I'm okay," she said, "but thank you." Olivia hesitated, lowering her voice. If anything happened earlier that made you uncomfortable, I'm really sorry. I'm not sure what that was about." Naomi offered her a small, appreciative smile. "It wasn't your fault." Her tone stayed even, but her eyes carried the weight Olivia sensed. The young flight attendant nodded, her expression tightening with sympathy before she continued down the aisle. Naomi leaned back into her seat. The hum of the engines grew louder as ground crews prepared the aircraft. A baby fussed a few rows forward. Someone coughed. A man across the aisle sighed as he closed his laptop. All ordinary sounds of an ordinary flight. But nothing about this morning felt ordinary to Naomi. She clasped her hands in her lap, letting her fingers trace the edge of her thumb in slow circles, a habit she had carried into adulthood from childhood. Back then, it was how she calmed herself before school presentations. Now it grounded her in moments when the world sought to shrink her. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You okay there?" It was the older man from row 17, the one with the silver hair who had been watching earlier. He leaned slightly back in his seat, speaking softly, not wanting to attract attention. Naomi hesitated before answering. "I'm fine." He held her gaze for a second longer than most strangers do. "You didn't deserve what happened," he said gently. The words hit Naomi's chest with unexpected force, not because they were dramatic, but because they were simple, honest, rare. She swallowed. "Thank you." He nodded and turned around, respecting her space. But the kindness lingered. Silence settled again, a silence that didn't feel peaceful, more like waiting. Somewhere near the front of the plane a phone rang, a sharp sound muffled through curtains. Then another. Short clipped voices followed. Naomi couldn't hear the words, but she recognized urgency when she heard it. Then she saw it. The curtain between first class and economy shifted. Rachel emerged. Her walk lacked the same crisp assurance from earlier. There was a stiffness to her steps now, something unsettled in her shoulders. Her hand tugged at the edge of her uniform blouse, smoothing it down even though it was already flawless. Naomi watched her quietly. Rachel approached Olivia near the galley. They spoke in hushed tones, but even from row 18 Naomi could read the tension. Olivia's brows pulled together. Rachel's jaw clenched. Olivia's eyes flicked toward Naomi, then back at Rachel. A few seconds later, Olivia slipped past Rachel and made her way toward the cockpit, and Rachel remained alone. Her posture wavered just for a moment, as if gravity suddenly felt heavier. Naomi looked back toward the window, not wanting to give Rachel the satisfaction of believing she was watching. But the truth was she could feel the shift happening. The plane wasn't moving yet, but something in the air was. Naomi exhaled slowly, letting herself settle into the present moment. She'd done her part. She'd spoken up to the right person. Now, whatever came next would unfold as it always did in its own time. Her phone vibrated again. A message from Ethan. "Boarding pause requested. Stand by." Naomi's brows lifted ever so slightly. A boarding pause. That was no small instruction. Then, over the speakers, the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a brief delay while we finalize some internal checks. Please remain seated. The man across the aisle raised an eyebrow. A few passengers murmured. Someone groaned impatiently. Naomi stayed still. Then she noticed Rachel again standing at the front of the economy cabin now. Her face had changed. The confidence was gone. Her eyes kept darting toward the cockpit. Her fingers fidgeted with the stylus clipped to her uniform. It was the first hint Rachel understood something had gone wrong. Really wrong. She moved down the aisle slower this time as she double-checked seatbelts that didn't need checking, straightened magazines that were already straight, tucked blankets that were perfectly fine, avoiding Naomi's gaze the way someone avoids the truth that's already caught up to them. She passed row 18 without pausing. Naomi didn't look up. She didn't need to. Her pulse stayed calm. Her shoulders rested against the seat. But inside her a storm of conflicting emotions churned. Anger, yes, that was there. Hurt, absolutely, always. But something else too, something sharper, clearer. Resolve. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. She wanted a world where moments like this didn't keep happening to people who looked like her. Her mother used to say, "Sometimes it's the small disrespect that cuts deepest, because it's the one people think they can get away with." Naomi finally understood the full truth of those words. Another 5 minutes passed. Then Naomi saw Olivia return from the cockpit. Her stride was more purposeful now, quieter but with an energy beneath it. She whispered something to the flight attendant in the first-class curtain area. The attendant's eyes widened. She quickly stepped aside. A moment later, Captain Mark Douglas himself stepped out. Gray streaks lined his hair. His posture carried authority earned from thousands of hours in the air. His expression was calm, but the tension around his eyes revealed something serious. And he was walking directly toward Naomi. Passengers looked up as he passed, confused, curious. It wasn't common for a captain to leave the cockpit before departure. He stopped at row 18. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly. Naomi looked up. Her voice was soft. "Yes, we need to speak with you for a moment." The passengers nearby turned their heads, trying not to stare but failing. Naomi rose from her seat, duffel still beneath her legs. "Please leave your belongings for now," Captain Douglas added gently. "This will only take a moment." Naomi nodded, stepping into the aisle. Captain Douglas led her toward the front of the cabin, Rachel frozen by the galley with an expression that looked dangerously close to fear. Naomi didn't stop, didn't speak, didn't gloat. She followed the captain past the curtain, past seat 2A, past the place she was supposed to be sitting all along. He stopped near the doorway that led to the cockpit. Then he turned to her, his voice low enough not to carry but firm enough to matter. "Miss Brooks," he said, "on behalf of North Sky Airlines, I want to apologize. We were informed of a discrepancy concerning your seating. We've confirmed that your ticket is valid and correctly issued. You should have never been asked to move." Naomi met his eyes. They were sincere, measured, professional. She gave a small nod. "Thank you for checking." The captain continued, his voice shifting into something deeper. "The chairman contacted us personally. He wants you restored to your seat immediately. And he has requested a full report of this incident." There it was, the first tremor of justice. Naomi breathed in slowly, letting the moment settle. Behind them, Rachel stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, color drained from her face. Olivia watched, silently, worry flickering in her eyes. Naomi's gaze softened for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I'll return to my seat." The captain stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Passengers looked up as Naomi moved forward again, not with triumph, not with anger, but with the same quiet dignity she'd carried since she stepped into the terminal that morning. She sat in 2A. The seat fit her perfectly. It always had. Rachel lingered near the galley behind her, trembling ever so slightly. And in that stillness, in that small pocket of time before the plane pushed back from the gate, the balance of the story began to shift. 7 minutes had passed. But the real storm hadn't even begun. When Naomi Brooks settled back into seat 2A, the cushion felt different beneath her. It wasn't softer, it wasn't more luxurious, but it felt earned, reclaimed, as if the seat itself had been waiting for her to return and restore whatever quiet imbalance Rachel had forced upon it. She placed her hands on the armrests, grounding herself. The window beside her framed the gray runway streaked faintly with drizzle. A tug of wind rocked the plane gently. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. Passengers in first class exchanged subtle glances, some ashamed, some curious, some pretending not to be watching at all. The uncomfortable buzz of awareness spread through the cabin like a ripple. This wasn't just a seating correction. Everyone felt that. This was something larger, something unsettling. Naomi inhaled long and slow. Her heart rate eased, her shoulders softened. But deep inside, something quiet and tired stirred a familiar ache she rarely let rise to the surface. An ache shaped like every small indignity she'd endured across her life, collected carefully like pebbles in a jar she never asked to carry. She didn't want to feel it now. Not today. Not before the most important meeting of her quarter. But feelings rarely waited for permission. She placed a hand against her chest, discreetly under the armrest, as if reminding her heartbeat to steady itself. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, uneven, hesitant. Rachel Miller. Naomi didn't turn. She stared straight ahead at the seat back in front of her as Rachel stopped just beside her row. She could feel Rachel's breathing shallow and strained, as if she were rehearsing words in her head that refused to come out smoothly. "Miss Brooks," Rachel said at last, her voice stiff, brittle in the center. Naomi turned her head just slightly, enough to acknowledge her, not enough to offer comfort. "Yes," Naomi replied, her tone calm but undeniably firm. Rachel swallowed hard. She clasped her hands behind her back, an almost subconscious attempt to look poised, though her posture betrayed nerves she could barely mask. "I wanted to apologize," Rachel said, "for the misunderstanding. I didn't intend to cause any inconvenience." The phrasing struck Naomi sharply. Misunderstanding, inconvenience, words that smoothed edges instead of naming them, words that diluted harm into something vague and polite. Naomi blinked once, slowly controlling her breath. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," she said softly. "And the inconvenience wasn't the problem." Rachel's shoulders tensed. A flicker of embarrassment crossed her face, quickly replaced with defensive composure. "I followed policy," Rachel murmured, eyes tightening. "Your name didn't match what I saw on the manifest. I reacted based on what I knew at the time." Naomi held her gaze unflinching. "You reacted based on what you thought you knew," she answered gently. "There's a difference." Passengers in the nearest rows pretended not to listen, but their stillness betrayed them. Even the hum of the cabin seemed to pause. Rachel pressed her lips together. She wasn't used to being confronted with grace. People usually argued with her, or apologized to her, or avoided her. But Naomi did none of those things. Naomi simply saw her, and that unsettled Rachel more than anything. "I didn't mean for it to become this," Rachel whispered. Naomi studied her face, really studied it. Beneath the polished uniform and hard expressions there was a thin layer of fear. Fear of consequences, fear of being judged, fear of what she had unleashed without realizing it. "You didn't expect anyone to notice," Naomi said quietly. "That's why it became this." For a moment, both women were silent. Naomi exhaled. She wasn't cruel. She had no desire to crush Rachel. That was never what this moment was about. Her mother had taught her that dignity wasn't something you gained by taking it from someone else. But she also couldn't let the truth go unspoken. Rachel lowered her gaze faintly. "I'm sorry. Not polished, not professional, just raw enough to feel real." Naomi nodded once. "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't rejection either. just a simple acknowledgement, one human being to another, in a space where both were exposed in different ways. Rachel stepped back, slowly retreating to the galley with a stiffness that revealed how rattled she truly was. Naomi looked out the window again. The drizzle had grown heavier. Tiny droplets ran down the glass like thin threads of silver. She pressed 2 fingers against her temple, massaging gently as old internal questions surfaced like sediment stirred in water. Why does it still hurt every time? Why do I still have to defend my right to belong? Why is dignity something I must prove instead of something assumed? A soft voice broke through her thoughts. Miss Brooks. Naomi turned slightly. It was Olivia Trent, the young flight attendant. She held a glass of water with both hands, offering it like something fragile. I thought you might want this, Olivia said. Naomi smiled genuinely this time. Thank you. Olivia hesitated, then leaned closer. For what it's worth, I told the captain what I saw. Not just what happened, but how it happened. Naomi's brows lifted. You didn't have to do that. I did, Olivia insisted softly. People need to tell the truth when it matters. There was a quiet conviction in her voice, an honesty Naomi admired instantly. Thank you, Naomi said, again the words deeper now. Olivia nodded and stepped away, leaving Naomi with the water and a sense of gratitude she hadn't expected today. Minutes passed. The cabin resumed its rhythm. Passengers settled. Overhead bins clicked shut. Someone asked where the nearest restroom was. Naomi's phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Report filed. I'm on the line with operations. Update soon. Another buzz. A second message. Proud of you for saying something. Naomi closed her eyes briefly as something warm spread across her chest. Not pride, not relief. Something like being seen, fully, without needing to prove or explain or justify. She typed a short reply. Thank you, Ethan. I just want this handled professionally. He responded instantly. It will be. She set her phone aside. The captain's voice came over the speakers again. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We'll begin our pushback from the gate shortly. Naomi settled into her chair. The leather was cool beneath her fingertips. Her posture relaxed, just slightly. But as the engines hummed louder, she sensed movement beside her. Someone approached the first-class section. Her eyes turned. It was Rachel, again, but not with the intention of speaking, not with an apology, not with a correction. She was crying, barely, quietly, trying desperately not to show it, her lips trembling as she stood just inside the galley curtain. Her hand covered her mouth as she tried to compose herself. It wasn't hysteria. It wasn't guilt alone. It was fear. Fear for her job. Fear of the consequences. Fear that one moment she thought no one would question might change the course of her life. Naomi watched her, a complicated ache spreading through her chest. She didn't want this for Rachel. She didn't relish seeing someone break down. That wasn't who she was. But she also couldn't forget the sting of humiliation earlier, the threat of security, the instinctive dismissal, the way Rachel had looked at her through her as if she couldn't possibly belong. The two truths coexisted uncomfortably inside Naomi. She closed her eyes for a moment. Her mother's words resurfaced. Hold people accountable, baby girl, but don't let hate sit in your heart. It will take up the space that hope needs. Naomi opened her eyes again. Rachel had turned away, wiping her face quickly as she disappeared back into the galley. The plane began its slow pushback from the gate. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft, warm glow. And as Naomi lifted her glass of water, the realization set in. This wasn't over, not by a long stretch. The incident had only just scratched the surface, because when the plane landed, the truth would land with it. And the airline, her airline, would never be the same again. The aircraft began its slow roll toward the runway wheels, humming softly beneath the floor. The lights inside the cabin shifted into that dim, early flight glow, casting warm tones across the rows of passengers. It created the illusion of calm, though nothing about the past 15 minutes had been calm for anyone who'd witnessed the confrontation, especially for Naomi Brooks. Naomi leaned back, letting her head rest lightly against the leather headrest of seat 2A. Her breathing had steadied, but deep inside, those earlier emotions still moved like unsettled water, not chaotic, not turbulent, just stirred. The engines roared louder as the aircraft turned toward its departure path. Naomi's hand drifted to the small silver bracelet on her wrist, her mother's old bracelet. Mary Brooks had worn it every day until her passing. Naomi wore it every time. She flew, a private reminder that no matter how high she rose, her roots always held her steady. She rubbed the bracelet softly, grounding herself. Behind her in the galley, Rachel Miller moved like a ghost. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't giving commands. She wasn't performing the confident choreography flight attendants usually did before takeoff. Instead, she stood still, back turned, her shoulders tight beneath her uniform's crisp fabric. Every few seconds she lifted a hand to her face, brushing away tears, fixing her hair, trying to rebuild the mask she had worn so easily earlier. Naomi could hear the faint sound of someone breathing unevenly behind the curtain. It twisted her heart in a way she hated and didn't expect. Justice shouldn't look like someone falling apart, she thought. But accountability sometimes does. She closed her eyes briefly. The captain's voice came over the speakers again. Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff. It was a simple instruction, but its weight pressed heavily against Rachel. She emerged from the galley, smoothing her uniform, her eyes slightly red. She avoided Naomi's row entirely as she began her pre-takeoff checks. Olivia Trent assisted her, quiet and gentle, picking up tasks Rachel normally handled without thinking. Naomi noticed how carefully Olivia watched Rachel, concern mixed with confusion and perhaps a touch of disappointment. Passengers in first class did what passengers often do when something uncomfortable happens: they pretended not to see. One man flipped open a newspaper, even though it was upside down. Another adjusted his headphones 3 times without turning them on. A couple whispered in the back of the cabin, their eyes flicking between Rachel and Naomi like tennis spectators. Naomi stared ahead at the seat back. She didn't want the attention. She didn't even want revenge. She wanted dignity. And she wanted the system that allowed this to happen to change. As the aircraft lined up on the runway, Naomi's phone buzzed once, one final vibration before airplane mode would take over. A message from Ethan. I'm looping in corporate security. Not to alarm you, just protocol now that the incident has escalated. Naomi took a breath. She typed, understood. She set the phone aside, placed it in the seat pocket and folded her hands calmly. Outwardly, she looked composed. Inwardly, she felt the weight of something bigger than herself stepping into motion. The engines thundered. The plane surged forward. The runway outside blurred into streaks of gray and white. Naomi closed her eyes. Not out of fear, she'd flown 1,000 times. But because she needed a moment of stillness. A moment to breathe into the ache in her chest. When the plane lifted off the ground, the cabin tilted back. Naomi opened her eyes to the soft glow of the sunrise cutting through the clouds. A strip of gold light stretched across the horizon, illuminating the sky in a way that looked almost like a promise. The aircraft reached its initial altitude. The engine settled into a steady hum. The seatbelt signs remained on. A quiet fell across the cabin. It was the kind of quiet where people finally exhaled the breath they'd been unconsciously holding. Where conversations resumed in soft murmurs. Where tension loosened its grip, though not entirely. 15 minutes passed. The plane cruised above a blanket of white clouds, and then, a soft chime echoed overhead. Olivia stepped forward, her voice gentle. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our in-flight service shortly. Please remain seated while the crew prepares. She moved gracefully through the aisle. When she reached Naomi, she paused. Can I get you anything to drink? She asked almost too softly. Naomi smiled faintly. Water is fine. Thank you. Olivia nodded and returned to the galley. But Rachel remained at the curtain, frozen in place, gripping the edge of a cabinet as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. She wasn't avoiding the work. She was avoiding the truth she knew was coming. And Naomi knew that look too well, the look of a person bracing for consequences. A few seconds later, Rachel stepped out holding a tray of drinks. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to steady them. When she reached row 1, she poured coffee for a passenger with mechanical precision. But Naomi noticed the smallest spill at the edge of the cup. Rachel noticed too, her jaw tightened. She wiped it quickly, cheeks flushing. She moved to the next row. When she approached row 2, Naomi felt a ripple of tension wash over both of them. Rachel stopped. She didn't look directly at Naomi, her eyes hovered somewhere near the tray instead. "Would you like anything to drink?" Rachel asked quietly, her voice strained. It was the kind of question spoken by someone fulfilling a requirement, not offering a service. Naomi looked at her, really looked at her. She saw the exhaustion, the fear, the humiliation. But she also saw something else, something Naomi recognized after years of dealing with difficult colleagues and investors. Pride cracking. Naomi answered after a moment, "Water is fine." Rachel nodded, poured it carefully, and placed the glass on Naomi's tray with trembling fingers. Before she stepped away, Naomi spoke softly. Not loud, not sharp, not punishing, just honest. "Rachel." The flight attendant froze. Slowly she turned her head. Naomi continued, her voice quiet but steady. "I hope today becomes a turning point for you, not an ending." Rachel blinked quickly, as if the words stung more than a reprimand would. She opened her mouth, closed it, then gave a single fragile nod before stepping away. Olivia glanced back from the galley. She looked relieved. She looked proud. She looked hopeful. Naomi took a sip of water. The plane hummed softly. The clouds drifted by in endless white fields. But inside Naomi's chest, something heavy began to loosen, just enough that she could breathe deeper. Another 20 minutes passed. Passengers settled into their screens, their books, their naps. A few whispered about the sunrise outside. Someone joked about turbulence that hadn't even happened yet. Life in the cabin resumed its normal rhythm. Naomi reached for her notebook, a small leather-bound one she always traveled with. She flipped to a blank page and began writing. Not notes for her presentation, not messages for Ethan, just thoughts she needed to get out of her head. Respect shouldn't have to be earned through pain. Dignity shouldn't be conditional. And belonging shouldn't be questioned before a person even speaks. She closed the notebook gently. Then she felt it again. Her phone buzzed once, just one quick vibration. Even in airplane mode it registered messages queued before departure. But when she tapped the screen, she saw it. A notification preview. From an unknown number. "Corporate affairs. We need to speak urgently when the plane lands." Another preview popped up beneath it. "Security reviewing footage now." A third. "Board escalating situation." Naomi exhaled long and slow. The storm was building, quietly, methodically, inevitably. And Naomi, sitting in 2A with her mother's bracelet around her wrist and her dignity intact, knew this was no longer just about her. This was about every person who had ever been treated like an anomaly in a place they earned the right to be. She pressed her hand lightly over her heart. "I'm okay," she whispered to herself. And for the first time that morning, she almost believed it. 30,000 feet above the ground, the world below was nothing but quiet white clouds, drifting like slow waves. Up here everything looked peaceful, serene, untouched. But inside the cabin of Flight 218, the quiet held a different weight, one stitched together with tension, unspoken questions, and the kind of stillness that comes after people witness something they know is not right, yet cannot put into words. Naomi Brooks sat in seat 2A with her palms resting lightly on her thighs, her breathing even now. She gazed out the window, letting her eyes settle on the sun's soft glow spreading across the horizon. The light painted the clouds in soft gold, a beauty she normally loved during flights. But today, even beauty felt complicated. The events before takeoff still lingered on her skin the way cold air lingers after stepping inside from winter. Not painful anymore, just present. Her mother used to say, "Some moments leave fingerprints on your spirit." This was one of them. A soft clink of glass pulled Naomi from her thoughts. A passenger in row 1 adjusted his champagne flute, glancing back subtly, then forward again when their eyes met. He offered her a small, embarrassed smile, a silent acknowledgement that he had seen everything earlier even if he hadn't known what to do. Naomi nodded once in return. She didn't blame him. Most people freeze when injustice shows its face in real time. Not because they don't care, but because they are afraid of stepping into conflict they were never taught how to navigate. She turned back to her window. The hum of the engines filled her ears, steady and soothing. The sound reminded her of childhood nights when she sat in the back booth of the airport cafeteria where her mother worked late shifts. The hum of jet engines had always made her feel safe. They meant movement, progress, possibility. Today that sound felt like a reminder of how far she had come and how far the world still needed to go. A shadow approached her row. Naomi looked up. It was Olivia Trent. She held a fresh cup of water, but Naomi could see from the young woman's cautious expression that this wasn't just about a drink. "Miss Brooks," Olivia whispered, leaning slightly closer. "The captain asked if you'd be willing to speak with him." Later during the flight, Naomi raised an eyebrow. "During the flight?" "Yes," Olivia said, glancing back toward the galley. "He said it's entirely up to you. No pressure. But he thought you might want an update." Naomi understood. Ethan must have pushed something through. The company must be moving quickly. "I'll speak with him when he's ready," Naomi replied gently. Olivia looked relieved. "Of course. I'll let him know." The young woman stepped away, but Naomi could feel the energy shift. Something was changing behind the scenes and the crew knew it. Rachel Miller especially. Naomi watched her from the corner of her eye. Rachel stood in the galley again, her back straight, but her hands fidgeting with the edges of a stack of napkins. Over and over, straightening, restacking, realigning, a nervous ritual. She kept glancing toward the cockpit door, then toward the first-class cabin, her eyes avoiding Naomi's row entirely. Naomi sighed softly and reached for her notebook again. She flipped to a page she had written earlier, a page filled with short reflections, fragments of frustrations, and a few painful realizations she didn't want to admit even to herself. She ran her fingers across the words slowly. Then she turned to a new page and wrote one sentence: "What we allow becomes what we live with." Her pen hovered beside the words, as if waiting for the next thought to find its place. But nothing came, not yet. She closed the notebook and rested it on her lap. A soft ding sounded overhead. The captain's voice followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be experiencing slight turbulence shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The first-class cabin complied quickly. Naomi buckled hers as well, pulling the strap with deliberate firmness. The plane shuddered lightly, then steadied, then shuddered again harder. Passengers murmured softly. A man cleared his throat. A woman clutched her armrest. Even Naomi felt her stomach tighten slightly, a normal reaction, but paired with the emotional tension of the day, it felt heavier than usual. Turbulence always reminded her how small humans were compared to the sky that held them. The lights flickered once. The plane dipped. A few people gasped. Naomi gripped the metal edge of her armrest but kept her breathing slow, steady. Through the curtain she saw Rachel stumble briefly as the plane jolted. She grabbed the wall panel to steady herself, then froze, her eyes blinking rapidly. Even turbulence couldn't shake the weight already on her shoulders. Naomi swallowed gently and looked back out the window. The clouds outside had thickened. The plane pushed through them like a ship through heavy waves. A powerful jolt made her suck in a breath, sharp but contained. Her heart thudded once strong. Passengers whispered. That one was big. "Is this normal? Should we worry?" Naomi watched the clouds swirl outside like white storms. Then the turbulence eased unexpectedly, the plane settling into a calmer rhythm. A collective exhale filled the cabin. The seatbelt sign stayed on. Naomi unclenched her jaw and rolled her shoulders gently, releasing tension she hadn't realized she was holding. Moments later, the cockpit door cracked open slightly. Captain Mark Douglas stepped out, his posture steady despite the turbulence. He exchanged a brief word with Olivia, then glanced toward Naomi's row. When Naomi nodded, he approached. He leaned down slightly, speaking quietly. "Miss Brooks," he said, "thank you for your patience. We're in a safe window for a short conversation. If you're comfortable, I'd like to update you." Naomi nodded again. "Of course." He motioned toward the small space near the bulkhead, away from the ears of other passengers. Naomi unbuckled her belt and followed. The space was small but more private. Olivia stood nearby, offering a reassuring smile. Captain Douglas lowered his voice. "We've contacted corporate headquarters. They've already begun reviewing today's events. Mr. Harrison informed us that a senior investigator will be waiting at the gate when we land." Naomi's expression stayed calm, but her pulse quickened slightly. The captain continued, "And there's more. The chairman wants to speak with you directly after landing. He said it's urgent." Naomi nodded slowly. "Thank you." She appreciated the professionalism in the captain's tone. He wasn't just relaying information, he was treating her with the respect and seriousness she deserved from the beginning. But then his voice softened. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I've been a captain for 27 years. I've seen my share of misunderstandings on flights. But this wasn't a misunderstanding." Naomi held his gaze. He continued, "I'm sorry this happened, truly, and I want you to know we're taking it seriously." Naomi breathed in, letting the words settle gently. "I appreciate that, Captain," she said. "All I want is fairness, not just for me." He nodded. "Understood." He stepped back toward the cockpit but paused. "One more thing," he added gently. "Please buckle up again. We may hit another rough patch." Naomi returned to her seat. Rachel watched her pass but didn't speak. Her posture was still rigid, but her eyes carried something new: uncertainty, maybe even regret. Naomi buckled her seatbelt. The turbulence returned. Not as harsh, but enough to make the cabin shift in a slow rhythm. People fell quiet again. Naomi rested her hand lightly on the notebook in her lap. Not to write, just to feel its presence. Another small jolt rocked the plane. Rachel braced herself, gripping the counter again. Naomi saw her flinch. For a brief second, Rachel's eyes flicked toward Naomi, but not with blame, with something that looked almost like sorrow. Naomi inhaled softly. It struck her all at once that sometimes the person who hurts you is also the person hurting themselves without knowing it. Naomi looked back out the window. The clouds had thinned. Sunlight broke through in wide golden beams. A soft calm returned to the cabin. And as she bathed in the warm light, Naomi felt a quiet realization settle into place. When this plane landed, nothing about her life or Rachel's would remain the same. And the airline above them, flying through a sky full of quiet reckonings, was about to face a truth 7 minutes had forced into motion. Cruising high above the Midwest, Flight 218 settled back into a fragile calm. The turbulence faded into a soft, steady hum, and passengers eased into their routines, reading, dozing, tapping quietly on keyboards. But inside first class, even the calm felt temporary, as if the cabin itself knew a reckoning waited beyond the clouds. Naomi Brooks sat with her seat slightly reclined, watching the sun drift across the horizon like a slow-moving ember. The warm light spilled onto her tray table and softened the harsh edges of the morning. She ran her thumb gently across her mother's silver bracelet, feeling each familiar ridge against her skin. She wasn't thinking about Rachel anymore. Not about the humiliation, not about the anger. She was thinking about the girl she used to be. The girl who sat in airport cafeterias while her mother mopped floors. A girl who dreamed of owning a company someday but never imagined she'd spend her adulthood defending her right to sit in a chair she purchased. The thought pressed hard on her chest. She breathed deeply. It was then she heard footsteps approaching. Soft, careful, slow. She glanced up and saw Olivia standing near her row again. The young flight attendant looked a little nervous, as though she'd come to say something she wasn't sure she had permission to say. "Miss Brooks," Olivia whispered. "Do you have a minute?" Naomi nodded. "Of course." Olivia shifted her weight. I know I'm not supposed to talk about crew matters with passengers, but I wanted to tell you something." Naomi set her notebook aside and gave Olivia her full attention. "You don't owe me anything," Naomi said gently. Olivia swallowed. "I know, but you deserve honesty, and someone should tell you what's happening." She glanced toward the galley again before continuing. "After the captain spoke with you, corporate called. It came through the cockpit line. They asked for a detailed timeline. The captain gave them everything, and they requested the cabin cameras be flagged for review." Naomi's brows lifted slightly. She didn't speak. She let Olivia continue. "I heard some of it from the jump seat," Olivia confessed. "Rachel, she was called out by name, and I think it shook her." Of course it did, Naomi thought, but she waited. Olivia lowered her voice further, leaning closer. "She hasn't stopped crying. She's been trying to hide it, but it's getting harder. She knows she crossed a line. And she said something that surprised me." Naomi tilted her head slightly. Olivia hesitated, then whispered, "She said she doesn't know why she reacted the way she did." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. Because that was often how it was, wasn't it? People didn't admit bias. They didn't face it head on. They just let it slither quietly under their decisions, shaping behavior in ways they couldn't or wouldn't explain. Naomi took a breath. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Olivia nodded, relief flooding her face. "I just thought you should know. You're not alone on this flight." Her voice softened further. "Some of us saw exactly what happened." Naomi's lips curved into a tiny, weary smile. "I appreciate that." Before Olivia could reply, a chime sounded overhead. Captain Douglas's voice followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now passing over Chicago airspace. We have approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes before landing. Please enjoy the remainder of your flight." As the announcement ended, Naomi glanced toward the front. There was movement behind the galley curtain. Hesitant, slow, as if someone stood there debating whether to step out. She already knew who it was: Rachel Miller. A few seconds later, Rachel emerged, her face paler than before, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. Her hair, normally immaculate, had loosened just slightly at the temples. It made her look unexpectedly human. She walked toward Naomi's row, stopping several feet away, as though the very air near Naomi carried weight. Naomi didn't turn fully. She waited. Rachel cleared her throat. "Miss Brooks," she began, her voice thin. "Could we talk?" Naomi turned to face her. Rachel held her hands clasped tightly in front of her. They trembled faintly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Rachel said suddenly, her voice cracking at the edge. "I know I handled the situation poorly. I know that. But I need you to hear something. Just once. Before we land." Naomi nodded once, giving permission. Rachel took a shaky breath. "When I saw you in first class," she whispered, "I made a judgment I shouldn't have made. A judgment that came too quickly. And I'm not proud of it." Her eyes glistened. She blinked it back. "I've been doing this job for 14 years, she continued. "I've handled every kind of passenger, every kind of conflict. But today, I saw you, and something in me reacted before my brain did. I don't even know why. And that scares me." Naomi studied her quietly. Rachel struggled for breath. "I didn't think someone like me could make a mistake like that," she whispered. "But I did, and now everything I've worked for might be gone." Naomi let the silence stretch. Not out of cruelty, but because the truth needed space to breathe. Finally she spoke. "Rachel," she said, calm and steady, "I don't want your career destroyed." Rachel's eyes widened, tears threatening again. "But I do want honesty," Naomi continued. "Honesty with yourself. About what you assumed, about why you assumed it. Rachel swallowed hard. And I want change, Naomi said firmly. Not apologies. Change. Rachel nodded, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. I understand, she whispered. I truly do. She stepped back, wiping her face quickly before retreating toward the galley. Olivia approached her with a soft hand on her shoulder, guiding her gently. Naomi turned back to her window. She should have felt triumphant. She didn't. She felt tired. Tired of these moments. Tired of being the one who had to teach lessons she never asked to teach. Tired of being a mirror held up to people who didn't want to face their own reflection. The clouds parted slightly, revealing patches of deep blue below. Naomi stared at them, her thoughts wandering. Her mother once told her, "Sometimes the world teaches you patience by giving you people who test it." Naomi exhaled with a soft, almost amused sigh. Her mother was always right. Another 30 minutes passed. Passengers stretched. Flight attendants moved through the aisles. The plane dipped into the gentlest descent, and the sky outside shifted into softer pastels. Then, a voice came over the speakers. "Miss Brooks, this is the captain. When convenient, I'd like to speak with you again." The cabin stirred. Several passengers turned to look at her. Subtle, curious, respectful. Naomi unbuckled and stood. Captain Douglas waited just beyond the curtain, his expression earnest. "Miss Brooks," he said, quietly. Corporate called again. "They've asked me to inform you before landing that a formal team is waiting at the gate. They'll escort you directly to a private lounge." Naomi blinked. "Escort me, yes," the captain said, "for your comfort. And because they intend to brief you on the next steps." Naomi nodded slowly. The captain looked down briefly, then up again. "And they informed me that Mr. Harrison will meet you personally." Naomi felt warmth bloom in her chest. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the captain added softly, "And Miss Miller. She's been temporarily suspended pending an internal review. They wanted you to know." Naomi felt the air leave her lungs in a small, slow exhale. Not relief, not satisfaction, just gravity. Weight. Reality. "Thank you, Captain," she said quietly. He nodded. As Naomi returned to her seat, the plane tilted gently, beginning its descent. The world outside shifted from clouds to land, patchwork fields, winding roads, clusters of towns small as toys. Naomi watched silently as the earth grew closer. The cabin felt different now. Not tense, not angry, just awake. People understood something had happened, something important, something that mattered. Rachel remained in the galley, still silent, ashamed, and learning in real time what accountability felt like. Olivia stood nearby, keeping a watchful, empathetic eye. Naomi sat tall in her mother's bracelet cool against her wrist. And as the landing gear lowered with a soft whir, she whispered to herself, "This isn't the end, it's the beginning." And she was right. When the plane touched down, the story would touch ground with it, and the ripple would become a wave. The sky outside shifted from soft gold to muted gray as Flight 218 began its descent into LaGuardia. The engines rumbled with a familiar grounding vibration, and the plane tilted slightly as it aligned with the runway path. Naomi Brooks felt the shift in altitude in her chest, a gentle tightening not of fear but of anticipation. The cabin around her seemed unusually quiet, not heavy like earlier, not charged, just waiting. Waiting for the moment wheels touched ground. Waiting for the next chapter of the morning's unfolding truth. Waiting to see what accountability looked like when the plane doors finally opened. Naomi adjusted her seat, sitting up straighter. She pulled her coat from behind her back and draped it loosely over her lap. Her mother's bracelet caught on the lining for a second, the metal cool against her skin. She ran her thumb along the bracelet once. A small ritual, a reminder of her foundation, of who she was long before the world had opinions about her. A soft chime echoed overhead. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Naomi glanced toward the galley. Rachel Miller stood stiffly near the back wall, hands clasped, head slightly bowed as Olivia whispered something beside her. Naomi couldn't hear the words, but the tenderness in Olivia's expression was unmistakable. Rachel nodded once, wiping the corner of her eye before stepping into the aisle to perform her safety checks. Her movements were smaller now, measured, no trace of the rigid confidence she'd worn earlier. When she reached Naomi's row, she paused. Not long. Just long enough that Naomi felt the tension ripple through the space between them. Rachel didn't speak. She only checked the seatbelt indicator, with trembling hands nodded mechanically, and continued down the aisle. Naomi inhaled slowly. Then exhaled. The plane descended lower, breaking through a thin layer of clouds. Patches of New York City appeared below, tiny cars crawling along highways, rows of brick buildings, docks stretched like dark arms into the water. This city was always alive, humming with relentless energy, but from up here it looked peaceful. Naomi found herself wondering if peace always required distance. If sometimes, to understand the truth, you had to step back far enough to see the whole shape of things. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft voice of the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are moments from landing. Please remain seated." Naomi braced gently against the armrests. The runway rushed upward. The wheels hit the ground with a firm thud. The aircraft bounced once, then roared forward as reverse thrusters engaged. A small sigh escaped from multiple rows. A collective release. They were on the ground now, and gravity had returned in more ways than one. The plane slowed, taxied, and finally drifted toward the gate. Naomi watched the airport vehicles approach, fuel trucks, baggage loaders, and then 2 black SUVs, unmarked, official. Her breath caught not from fear, but from recognition. Corporate security. North Sky had not wasted a second. The aircraft came to a stop. The seatbelt sign chimed off. But instead of the usual rustling of passengers standing, the first-class cabin stayed still, almost reverently still. Then, a voice from the front, calm and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated for a moment." The captain stepped out of the cockpit. Rachel stiffened. Olivia straightened. And every passenger turned their head. The captain looked toward Naomi. "Miss Brooks," he said gently, "corporate security will meet you at the jet bridge. They'll escort you to a private lounge for your meeting with Mr. Harrison." Naomi nodded softly. "Thank you, Captain." He stepped aside. Naomi stood. For the first time in nearly 2 hours, the eyes watching her did not carry suspicion, curiosity, or discomfort. They carried respect, quiet, earnest, human. Naomi retrieved her duffel bag from the overhead compartment. A man in row 1 stepped aside to give her space. A woman in row 3 touched her wrist lightly as she passed. "For what it's worth." "I'm sorry you went through that," the woman whispered. Naomi offered a soft smile. "Thank you." As she reached the front of the cabin, Rachel appeared at the galley curtain, standing not in authority but in hesitation. "Miss Brooks," she said, voice trembling, May I say one more thing before you go?" Naomi paused. Passengers watched quietly. Olivia shifted her weight, glancing between them nervously. "Go ahead," Naomi said. Rachel swallowed hard. "I know this doesn't fix anything," she said, "but I want you to know that I will remember today for the rest of my life, not because of the consequences, but because you spoke to me with more grace than I deserved." Naomi kept her expression soft, not forgiving, not dismissive, just steady. Rachel blinked rapidly, tears gathering again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "truly. And I hope one day I can become the person you treated me as." Naomi nodded once. That was enough. With a final breath, she stepped onto the jet bridge. 2 members of corporate security dressed in black suits with North Sky badges stood waiting. "Miss Brooks?" one asked. "Yes, this way, ma'am. We'll escort you." They walked beside her calmly, not hovering, not crowding, just present, a protective presence more symbolic than necessary. The jet bridge opened into a quiet side hallway, completely empty except for two operations managers, who nodded respectfully as Naomi passed. They led her through an employee-only corridor, away from the noise, away from crowds, away from curious eyes. Inside the private lounge, the lighting was soft and warm. The room smelled faintly of cedar and citrus. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood near the window, his back to her as he looked out at the runway. Ethan Harrison. He turned when Naomi stepped in. His eyes softened immediately. "Naomi," he said, walking toward her and opening his arms slightly, welcoming but not assuming. Naomi stepped into the half-embrace, appreciating his warmth and respect. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "I'm all right," Naomi answered. Her voice stayed calm, though she felt her throat tighten slightly at the sincerity in his tone. Ethan gestured for her to sit. She did. He sat across from her, leaning forward. "I'm going to be honest," he said. "When I read your message, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Anger. Real anger." Naomi sighed softly. "I didn't want to escalate it," she said. "I just wanted someone to know." "You did exactly the right thing," Ethan said firmly. "I want you to hear that." He opened a folder on the table between them. Inside were printed screenshots, reports, time-stamped logs, and one still image from the cabin security footage. Rachel standing over Naomi, posture rigid, expression skeptical, commanding her to move. Naomi's stomach tightened. Ethan spoke slowly. "We have begun a full review not just of this incident but of our entire training system. Bias awareness, anti-discrimination, enforcement, reporting protocols, everything." He met Naomi's eyes. "This will not be swept under the rug." Naomi nodded, absorbing every word. Ethan leaned back slightly. "There's more," he added. "A lot more. But before we get into the details," he paused. His expression softened. "I want to say something as your colleague, someone who has known you for years." Naomi lifted her gaze. "You didn't deserve any of this," Ethan said. "Not today. Not ever. And I am sorry. Truly sorry." The sincerity in his voice cracked something inside her. Not pain, not anger. Something gentler. Relief. She didn't cry, but she let herself feel the weight easing off her shoulders. Ethan sat back, breathing slowly. "We're going to handle this properly," he said. "You have my word." Naomi nodded, once steady but quiet. "I know," she whispered. The meeting continued, plans, timelines, reviews, but Naomi processed it through a fog of exhaustion and clarity. A strange mix. What mattered most wasn't punishment, it was change. Real change. Institutional change. Something that would protect the next Naomi Brooks, who boarded a plane with quiet confidence and a valid first-class ticket. When the meeting ended, Ethan walked her to the lounge door. "We'll continue this tomorrow," he said. "For now, go rest." Naomi smiled softly. "Thank you, Ethan." As she stepped out into the quiet hallway, something inside her settled. The storm had landed, but so had she. And one thing was certain, this wasn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It was the beginning of something bigger, something necessary, something overdue. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass windows of the North Sky Airlines headquarters, splashing soft golden light across the marble floors. Naomi Brooks stepped inside the lobby with a quiet steadiness, neither hurried nor hesitant, carrying herself with the calm certainty of someone who knew her purpose. Her coffee was warm in her hand. Her breath was slow, her heart steady. But beneath that composure lived something deeper, something that had formed quietly overnight. Resolve. Naomi had slept little, though not because of distress. Her mind had been turning with the precision of an engine, mapping pathways, understanding implications, considering not only the personal hurt she endured, but the broader responsibility now sitting in her hands. She wasn't just seeking justice for herself, she was shaping a precedent. Today was the meeting with the full senior executive team, And today she intended to speak clearly, not loudly, not angrily, but with the weight and clarity that changed systems. As she crossed the lobby, several employees looked up. Some nodded respectfully, others cast her looks filled with unspoken empathy. News traveled quickly inside a corporation, especially when the chairman called an emergency meeting. Naomi offered a small, warm nod to each face she passed. She never carried herself above people. That wasn't her upbringing. That wasn't who Mary Brooks raised. In the mirrored panel of the elevator, Naomi caught her own reflection. Strong but tired eyes. A composed jawline. A quiet elegance in the way she stood. She inhaled once. "Let's do this," she whispered to herself. The elevator doors opened to the top floor. Ethan Harrison waited just outside the conference room. His suit jacket was off sleeves, rolled up coffee barely touched. He looked like a man who hadn't slept either, but out of conviction, not worry. "Morning," he said gently. "Morning," Naomi replied. "You ready? As ready as I need to be." He gave a slight nod, an unspoken agreement that he trusted her completely. Ethan opened the door for her, and Naomi stepped into a room filled with senior vice presidents, operational directors, HR leaders, legal counsel faces, familiar faces she'd partnered with, debated with, built projects with. But today was different. Today, every one of them was waiting for her voice. The room fell silent. Ethan began. "Thank you all for joining on short notice. As you've been briefed, yesterday we had an incident on Flight 218 involving Miss Naomi Brooks." Murmurs shifted. Papers rustled. Eyes flickered toward her with curiosity, caution, and concern. "This incident," Ethan continued, "is not just about a seat. It is about conduct bias and the safety and dignity of our passengers. We're here to determine the concrete steps forward." Then he turned. "Naomi, if you're comfortable, please share your account." The room's attention pivoted toward her like a synchronized motion. Naomi stood. She didn't raise her shoulders, didn't stiffen her spine. She simply stood like a woman who had spoken truth many times before in spaces more intimidating than this. "Thank you," she began softly. Her voice carried not because she forced it, but because silence made room for her. "I'll tell you what happened, but I need to be clear, this isn't about punishing one person. This is about understanding how an environment allows someone to act on a bias they may not even realize they carry." Pens paused midair. Breaths quieted. Naomi recounted the events not dramatically, not with embellishment, but exactly as they happened. The boarding, the assumption, the dismissal of her valid first-class ticket, the relocation, Rachel's tone, Olivia's hesitation, the escalation, the humiliation. Her voice didn't tremble once. When she finished, she added calmly, "I've been in boardrooms where people underestimated me. I've been in negotiations where my presence was questioned. I've lived through assumptions like this my entire life. But on a plane where I had a confirmed seat, where the rules were clear, where the facts were visible, it hits differently." She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes steady and warm. When someone can misuse authority because they think a black woman doesn't fit the picture of a first-class passenger, that means the picture itself is flawed. And if we don't address that, we leave that flaw in the system. For the next woman, the next man, the next child. Her voice softened, even more sincere. "I don't want an apology. I want change." The room remained silent. Not uncomfortable silence, reflective silence, the kind that happens when truth is undeniable. Ethan stood again. "This is why we're here." "Naomi, thank you." The head of HR cleared her throat, speaking with a professionalism laced with emotion. "Miss Brooks, I want to personally say thank you for handling this with such dignity. We've reviewed the footage, interviewed the crew, and cross-checked all protocols. Your account is accurate. What happened to you was a breach of policy and ethics," a legal counsel added, "and it could have escalated into a discriminatory liability case. The fact that you chose internal accountability rather than a lawsuit is something we deeply respect." Naomi nodded. "I'm not here to break the company," she said quietly. "I'm here to fix what's broken." Ethan took over again, moving smoothly into the next phase. Here are our recommendations, and these are not optional. He distributed documents around the table. North Sky will implement a 5-stage corrective initiative immediately. He listed them slowly. 1. Mandatory anti-bias and passenger dignity training for all flight crews every 6 months. 2. A new passenger verification escalation rule. No seat reassignment without supervisor approval and documented reason. 3. Installation of front cabin objective review systems to record staff-passenger interactions for safety and accountability. 4. Anonymous crew reporting channels for staff to flag concerning behavior among colleagues. 5. A diversity accountability board led by external experts and Naomi if she accepts to audit quarterly reports. Naomi blinked softly, surprised. Ethan continued, "We want your leadership in this, Naomi. Not because you owe us, but because your voice is essential." Naomi exhaled slowly. It was a big ask, a heavy one, a meaningful one. She considered it for several seconds, then nodded. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "But only if this team commits to real, measurable change, not symbolic gestures." The room nodded collectively. Ethan smiled with relief. "We commit." For the first time since yesterday's flight, Naomi felt something loosen inside her. Not victory, not pride. Purpose. The meeting ended shortly after, filled with logistics, dates, committees, timelines. When Naomi stepped out into the hallway, Ethan walked beside her. "You handled that with more grace than most people could," he said. Naomi smiled softly. "Grace isn't weakness, Ethan. It's control." He chuckled lightly. "Only you could say something like that and make it inspirational." She shrugged modestly, though warmth softened her eyes. As they reached the elevator, Ethan paused. "One more thing," he said. "Rachel Miller's formal review is tomorrow. Do you want to attend?" Naomi thought about it. She pictured Rachel's trembling hands, her lowered eyes, her voice cracking with regret. Then she shook her head gently. "No," she said. "That space is hers to face, and hers to grow from." Ethan looked at her with admiration. "You're one of the strongest leaders I've ever known." Naomi offered a small smile. "I learned early on, strength isn't how loud you fight. It's how clearly you stand." The elevator arrived. Naomi stepped in. As the doors began to close, she whispered, "And I'm standing." The doors shut. And for the first time since stepping onto Flight 218, Naomi Brooks felt like the ground beneath her feet was finally steady again. The conference room assigned for disciplinary hearings wasn't large, but it carried an unmistakable weight. The walls were glass-frosted halfway up for privacy, and a long oak table dominated the center. Soft overhead lighting hummed quietly, lending the room an almost judicial stillness. Rachel Miller sat alone at one end of the table, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were colorless. She breathed in shallow, uneven pulls. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, but she felt anything but composed. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. She had replayed the events of Flight 218 until the scenes blurred, then sharpened again, then blurred once more. Every tone she used, every assumption she made, every moment she thought she was doing her job. But deep down, she knew the truth. She hadn't acted out of protocol. She had acted out of bias. And the acknowledgement of that sat like a stone in the center of her chest. A soft knock sounded on the door. 3 people entered: the head of HR, a legal representative, a senior operations manager. They took their seats without harshness, but without warmth either. The head of HR, the same woman who had spoken respectfully to Naomi yesterday, opened a folder and looked at Rachel with steady eyes. "Rachel, thank you for coming. Before we begin, I want you to know that this is a formal hearing. We're here to review the findings and give you the opportunity to speak. Everything said today will be part of the final decision." Rachel nodded stiffly. Her throat felt thick, tight. "We'll start with the incident summary," the HR director said. "Then we'll review footage statements and policy violations." After that, you'll have time to respond." Rachel swallowed hard, bracing herself. The HR director began. "On Flight 218 from Chicago to New York, you reassigned a first-class passenger with a valid ticket, Miss Naomi Brooks, to a seat in the economy cabin without cause. You did so without supervisor approval and without verification." She turned a page. "You also used language that suggested the passenger did not fit in the cabin. While unintentionally phrased, these words are recognized as bias-coded." Rachel squeezed her hands tighter. "Passenger Brooks filed an internal report, and her claim is corroborated by 2 witnesses, Olivia Trent and Captain Mark Douglas." Rachel's stomach twisted. She knew Olivia had been honest. She expected the captain to be transparent, but hearing it aloud felt like being peeled open. The legal representative spoke next. "In addition, security footage confirms that Miss Brooks presented her first-class ticket 3 separate times. You acknowledged the ticket each time but still insisted she move." He paused. "This is a clear breach of Passenger Rights Policy 3234 and Crew Conduct Code 7.1. Rachel blinked rapidly, trying to keep her vision from blurring. The operations manager leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Rachel, you've been with this airline for 12 years. Your record until now has been clean. But this incident is severe not only because of who the passenger is, but because of the implications for all passengers." Rachel nodded weakly. She knew. She understood more now than she had on the plane. She had spent the last 24 hours confronting herself in ways she never had. The HR director folded her hands. "Before we proceed to the verdict phase, Rachel, we'd like to hear your explanation. You may speak freely." Rachel inhaled shakily. For a moment, she didn't know where to begin. Then, something inside her, something honest, something tired, rose to the surface. "I won't defend what I did," Rachel said softly. "Because there's no defense." The room remained still. "I thought I was trusting my instincts. But they weren't instincts. They were assumptions. Wrong assumptions." Her voice cracked. "When Miss Brooks boarded, she carried herself with quiet confidence. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't demand anything. She just existed. And, for some reason, that made me question her." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I didn't realize until later that I questioned her because of the picture in my head of who belongs in first class. A picture that was wrong. A picture I didn't even know I had." Her breath shook. "I heard a woman who did nothing wrong. A woman who handled my wrongdoing with more respect than I showed her. And that's something I'm going to carry for a long time." She wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not because of what this means for my job, but because of what it revealed about me." The legal representative shifted almost sympathetically. The HR director gave a small nod. "Thank you for your honesty, Rachel." The operations manager flipped a page. "We also have a written apology you sent last night to the board. Would you like to add anything to that?" Rachel shook her head. "No. Everything I needed to say is already in the report. I just hope Miss Brooks never feels that way again because of anyone wearing this uniform." The panel exchanged looks. Respectful, measured, sober. The HR director closed her folder. "Rachel, we've reviewed all evidence in your statement. We'll deliver the final decision now." Rachel straightened slightly. Her breath held. "The airline's verdict is termination of employment effective immediately." Rachel exhaled slowly, the words sinking in like a physical weight. "Termination." The HR director continued gently. "We recognize your remorse. We acknowledge the 12 years of service you have given. And we truly hope this experience becomes a turning point for your future." Rachel nodded numbly. Her career, her identity, 12 years of routine, purpose, pride, it all fell away in a single moment. "We'll escort you to collect your belongings," the operations manager said. Rachel stood on shaking legs, but the HR director lifted a hand gently. "One more thing," she said. Miss Brooks asked not to attend today, but she wanted us to deliver you a message. Rachel froze. A message. The HR director unfolded a small note. Naomi's handwriting was simple, calm, steady. Accountability isn't the end of a person. It's the beginning of who they choose to become. Naomi Brooks. Rachel inhaled sharply. Her lips trembled. Her shoulders folded inward. The HR director spoke quietly. She wanted you to have that. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth, swallowing tears that came too quickly to hide. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was something gentler, something harder, something more profound. Responsibility. A chance to rise differently than she fell. The panel waited respectfully as Rachel composed herself. Finally, she nodded, whispered a fragile thank you, and followed the operations manager toward the door. The HR director watched her leave, expression solemn. She knew everyone in that room knew this wouldn't be the last chapter of Rachel Miller's life, but it was the closing of one. A painful one, a necessary one. Outside the building, the air was crisp. A light wind tugged at Rachel's blazer as she stepped into the open. She paused on the sidewalk. 12 years, gone. But something unexpected stirred inside her. Not relief, not clarity, but possibility. Painful possibility. She looked at the note again. The words settled deep in her chest. Accountability isn't the end of a person. She folded the note gently, placing it against her heart beneath her palm. Then, for the first time since the wheels of Flight 218 hit the runway, she took a full breath, and she whispered softly to herself, "I'm going to become better than this. Not for the airline, not for a job, for herself, for the version of herself she wanted to grow into." And somewhere across town in a quiet office, Naomi Brooks was doing the same in her own way. Not celebrating a consequence, not reveling in justice, but quietly nurturing the belief that people could change. Because growth, real growth, wasn't measured in apologies. It was measured in who a person became after the apology ended. And as the city hummed around them, both women took one step forward. Different steps, different paths, but both in the direction of something better. The afternoon sky over Manhattan carried a soft silver tone, bright enough to keep the city awake, but muted enough to suggest something quieter was settling in. It was the kind of light that made reflections look softer, made edges less harsh, a gentle pause in a place that rarely paused at all. Naomi Brooks sat in her office with the large windows stretching floor to ceiling behind her, giving her a panoramic view of the city. But she wasn't looking at the skyline. Not today. In front of her was her notebook, open, blank, untouched since the morning. She tapped her pen lightly against the edge of the page, a rhythmic, almost meditative motion. She wasn't stuck. She wasn't unsure. She was simply processing. Not the facts, those were clear. Not the decisions, those were made. Not the consequences, those had unfolded. She was processing the human part. The part that didn't fit neatly into reports and emails and policy frameworks. Ethan Harrison had sent her a brief update an hour earlier. Rachel's termination was finalized. Her exit interview completed. Her badge deactivated. It was done. The system had moved swiftly, professionally, decisively. And that mattered. But Naomi wasn't thinking about punishment. She never had been. Her thoughts were on something far more difficult, to hold the weight of being the one who must set a standard, even when you didn't ask to carry that responsibility. As she rested the pen against the page, her phone buzzed gently. A message from her mother. Just 3 words, "Proud of you." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, letting that warmth settle in her chest. Her mother never wrote long messages. She didn't need to. Her entire childhood had been full of quiet affirmations that spoke louder than paragraphs ever could. Naomi typed back a simple, "Love you, Mom." She placed the phone aside and finally leaned back in her chair, exhaling. The office was still. The hum of the building's ventilation was steady and low. A soft scent of cedar from the diffuser drifted in the air. A knock sounded at the door. A familiar voice followed. Naomi, do you have a few minutes? It was Haley, her chief of staff. Of course, Naomi said, straightening. Haley stepped inside holding a tablet and a small stack of envelopes, physical envelopes, which was unusual. She placed them gently on Naomi's desk. These arrived for you, she said. Courier deliveries, personal letters, all from North Sky employees. Naomi blinked. What, she asked softly. Word got around, Haley explained, about the incident, about your speech in the executive meeting, about the new initiatives. People wanted to say something. Naomi stared at the envelopes silently. They weren't corporate memos. They weren't formal apologies or procedural acknowledgments. They were personal. Do you want me to stay? Haley asked. Naomi shook her head. No, I'll read them alone. Haley nodded, lingering for a brief moment. For what it's worth, she said gently, what you did this week, it mattered. More than you know. Her voice carried a sincerity Naomi could feel. Thank you, Haley, Naomi murmured. The office door closed softly behind her. Naomi reached for the first envelope. Its paper was thick and soft, handwritten in neat cursive. She opened it carefully. Miss Brooks, I've worked at North Sky for 18 years. I've seen a lot good and bad, but today was the first time I saw leadership take accountability this seriously. Thank you for not being silent. My daughter is 13, and she looks like you. I want her to grow up in a world where her dignity isn't questioned. You helped move us closer to that. Marlene S. Naomi felt her throat tighten. She opened another. I was on the training team in 2012 when we tried to push for new bias modules. It didn't pass, but now it will, because you made them listen. Thank you. D. Harper, a third. I'm a gate agent. I've seen this kind of thing happen more often than people think. I'm grateful someone finally had the courage and the position to bring it forward in a way the company couldn't ignore. T. Lane, she paused, hand trembling slightly, overwhelmed not by the content, but by the collective voice of it. Voices she had unintentionally empowered just by refusing to be dismissed. She closed the letters, gently stacking them with care. Her heartbeat steadied again, not heavier, not lighter, but clearer. This was bigger than her discomfort, bigger than her personal experience, bigger than one flight attendant's mistake. This was about everyone who had spent years biting their tongue, shrinking themselves, lowering their gaze, because speaking up felt dangerous. She wouldn't let this moment fade. She couldn't. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately as she picked up her pen and finally wrote the first words on the blank page. A system changes only when the people inside it refuse to accept the old shape. She paused, absorbed the sentence, then kept writing ideas, frameworks, long-term solutions, not for the board, not for PR, but for something sustainable, something real. A soft buzz interrupted her focus. A call request. From Ethan, she answered. Hey, Ethan said, voice steady but heavy with the fatigue of a long day. I wanted to check in. I'm okay, Naomi said honestly, just processing everything. I figured, Ethan replied. Listen, there's something else you should know. Naomi straightened slightly. Rachel asked HR if she could send you a personal letter, he said gently. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief second. What did they say? She asked. They said it's up to you. Naomi opened her eyes again, calm and composed. I'll read it, she said. If she chooses to send it. Ethan exhaled softly. All right, I'll let them know. There was a brief pause. You did something important this week, Naomi. So did you. You led the way. Naomi gave a small smile. Maybe. But it's only the beginning. I know, he said. And I'm glad you're the one leading it. They ended the call. Naomi stood from her chair and walked to the window. The city below looked busy as ever. Yellow cabs weaving through traffic, people moving quickly across crosswalks, buildings casting long shadows across the streets. She watched the motion, the rhythm, the relentless pace. The world rarely slowed down. But sometimes, just sometimes, moments like this carved space for reflection. She pressed her palm against the glass, gently taking in the hum of the city. She wasn't naive. She knew real change would take time. She knew policies didn't magically rewrite culture. But she also knew something else, something her mother taught her in the simplest ways. The right direction is enough. Even one step, and she had taken more than one. A soft knock came again. This time it was Olivia, standing small in the doorway, nervous smile, hands clasped. "Miss Brooks," she whispered. "Come in, Olivia." Olivia stepped inside, closing the door behind her, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I wanted to see you," she said softly, "to thank you." Naomi frowned gently. "For what? For?" "Not blaming all of us," Olivia said, voice cracking. "For noticing that I wanted to help, for mentioning me in the report. I was scared. I didn't know how to stop what was happening, and I regret that every minute." Naomi walked toward her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing once you found your voice," she said. "That's what matters." Olivia swallowed hard. "I want to be better," she whispered. "And you will," Naomi replied, warm and certain. Olivia nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Naomi watched her leave, then turned back to the window. The city's rhythm continued. Her rhythm continued too. But something within her, quiet, steady, powerful, had shifted. She wasn't just responding to an incident anymore. She was shaping a movement, and the aftershocks were only beginning. The morning haze lingered over the Hudson River like a thin veil, softening the edges of the skyline as Naomi Brooks stepped out of the black car. North Sky Airline's Training and Cultural Advancement Center stood before her, a modern building of glass and steel gleaming with the muted pride of a place built for progress. Today was the launch. The first official session of the new Dignity and Bias Accountability Program, the initiative born directly from the events of Flight 218. Naomi paused at the entrance, letting the weight of the day settle on her shoulders. Not heaviness, not pressure. Something deeper. Meaning. Haley walked beside her, tablet in hand, moving with the quiet efficiency that made her indispensable. "Everything's prepared," Haley said. "Streaming equipment checked. Guest seating filled. Press kept outside per protocol. The boards in the front row." Naomi breathed slowly, letting each detail land. "And the internal attendees?" she asked. "Over 200 employees across departments," Haley answered. "Flight crews, supervisors, gate staff, training officers. More joining virtually." Naomi nodded. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a turning point. Inside the lobby, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, soft murmurs, the shuffling of papers, the hum of microphones being tested. Several employees straightened when Naomi entered, greeting her with a mix of respect and quiet gratitude. She made her way to the backstage waiting area where Ethan Harrison stood reviewing notes. When he saw her, he closed the folder and smiled, subtle but full of pride. "You good?" he asked gently. Naomi offered a small smile. "As good as anyone can be before speaking to half the company." He chuckled lightly. "You're going to do fine. Better than fine. Maybe," she murmured. "But this isn't about performing. It's about planting." Ethan paused, considering that. "You always were a long-view thinker," he said. "It's one of your gifts." Naomi didn't answer, but she felt the encouragement settle in her chest, grounding her. A staff member peeked inside. "Miss Brooks, it's time." Naomi stepped onto the stage as the room quieted. Rows of employees looked up at her faces, young and old, seasoned and new, hopeful and uncertain. Ethan stood just behind her in support, but the podium belonged solely to her. She took her place. The lights softened. The whispers stilled. A breath moved through the room like a quiet wave. Naomi began. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice was gentle, steady, deeply human. "We're here today because we faced a moment that forced us to look at who we are, not just as a company, but as people." She let the words hang for a moment. "I won't repeat the details of what happened on Flight 218. You've all read the reports. But I want to talk about what that moment revealed because this program isn't about blame, it's about responsibility. And responsibility belongs to all of us. Her gaze swept the room, not accusing, not searching, just connecting. When I was asked to help shape this initiative, I didn't think about punishment. I didn't think about retribution. I thought about the young women and men who board our flights every day, passengers and crew carrying stories we cannot see, histories we cannot know, and identities that deserve dignity without question. She paused, letting the room breathe with her. When someone's dignity is challenged, whether intentionally or unconsciously, it leaves a mark. And healing that mark requires something more than policy. It requires honesty. She placed a hand lightly on the edge of the podium. Honesty with ourselves. Several employees shifted, absorbing the quiet truth of her words. This program, Naomi continued, is not just a training. It's a commitment to see the whole person in front of us, a commitment to pause before assuming, a commitment to understand how our experiences shape our judgment and how our judgment can affect someone else's life in seconds. She exhaled softly. This isn't easy work. Growth never is, but it's necessary work. Ethan watched from behind, jaw tight with the emotion of someone witnessing a moment that mattered beyond corporate policy. Naomi's voice softened further. We all carry biases. Me, you, every single person in this room. Bias isn't the problem. Silence is. Unexamined assumptions are. The refusal to grow is. A ripple of agreement moved through the rows, and so today we start something new, something rooted not in perfection but in accountability, not in shame but in courage. She stepped away from the podium, letting her final words reach the room without barrier. We cannot change the world in one day, but we can change the way we move within it. And if we do that day by day, moment by moment, we create a culture where dignity isn't earned. It's guaranteed. The room remained silent for a long moment, not out of discomfort but reverence. Then applause rose, slow at first, then building, then filling the hall with the unmistakable sound of people who understood that something inside them had shifted, not fixed, not finished, shifted. Ethan rejoined her as she stepped off stage. That, he said quietly, was leadership. Naomi shook her head gently. That was honesty. He smiled. Both can be true. They walked together toward the hallway where refreshments were set up for a post-session gathering. Employees approached Naomi cautiously, some wanting to thank her, others wanting to share their own stories. She listened with patience, with empathy, with presence. Then, amid the steady flow of conversations, Naomi saw someone she did not expect. A woman standing near the far wall, hands clasped in front of her shoulders, tight with uncertainty. Rachel Miller, not in uniform, not escorted, not hiding, just standing, nervous, determined. The room subtly shifted as people noticed her. A few whispers, a few glances. Naomi walked toward her with calm steps. Rachel's breath shook as she spoke. Miss Brooks. I didn't come to disrupt anything. HR invited me. They said today was about learning, and they thought it might help me understand more. Naomi nodded gently. I'm glad you're here. Rachel blinked, stunned by the sincerity. I watched your speech, she said, voice trembling, and I realized something. Naomi waited quietly. I realized the moment I made you move seats, I wasn't just wrong, I was small. I acted from fear, fear of being challenged, fear of being wrong, fear of what I didn't understand. Her voice cracked. But you acted from strength and grace. You gave me more respect than I gave you. Tears gathered in her eyes. I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to become someone who never acts that way again. Not just at work, anywhere. Naomi placed a gentle hand on her arm. Change doesn't erase what happened, she said softly, but it can prevent it from happening again. Rachel nodded, tears falling quietly. That's why I'm here, she whispered. Naomi offered a small, warm smile. then you're already on the right path. A reporter in the hallway lifted a camera, trying subtly to capture the moment. Naomi held up a hand calmly. "No photos," she said. "Not today. This wasn't a PR story. This wasn't spectacle. This was human." She walked Rachel toward the exit, speaking softly with her. The rest of the room watched, not with judgment but with recognition. Because accountability wasn't a headline. It was a process, a journey, a choice. Later that evening, Naomi stood again by her window, the city lights flickering like constellations. She felt tired, not from burden but from purpose, from stepping into something larger than she expected, from guiding a moment that needed a gentle but firm hand. Her notebook lay open on her desk. She wrote one line: "Legacy begins the moment we decide not to look away." She closed the notebook, and she knew tomorrow the work would continue, and she would too. The day had thinned into early evening when Naomi Brooks finally stepped out of North Sky's training center. The cool air brushed against her face, carrying the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Manhattan's lights were beginning to flicker on one window at a time, like a giant grid slowly awakening for the night shift. She paused on the sidewalk, letting the city breathe around her. Cars hummed by. People hurried past. The world was moving as it always did. But inside Naomi, something had changed, subtle yet unmistakable, like the quiet settling of earth after an earthquake. A chapter had closed today. A new one had opened. And she stood firmly between them, grounded and unshaken. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. "Everyone's still talking about your speech. You shifted the air today, Naomi." She smiled softly. Not out of pride, out of purpose. Before she could reply, another message appeared, this time from her mother. "Dinner tomorrow, I'll cook. You look tired in the interview clips." Naomi laughed gently. Her mom never missed anything. She typed back, "Tomorrow. I'd love that." The car pulled up, a black Lincoln driven by William, who greeted her with a polite nod. "Evening, Miss Brooks," he said. "Long day." Naomi slipped into the back seat. "Long," she admitted, "but worthwhile." As the car merged into traffic, Naomi leaned her head back against the seat. The city lights reflected in the window beside her, streaks of gold and blue, stretching across the glass like painted lines. Her mind drifted, not to the meeting, not to the program launch, not even to Rachel Miller's unexpected appearance. Instead, she thought about something older, something deeper. Her first flight as a young consultant years ago, she had worn a blazer too big for her shoulders. She had spoken with more caution than confidence. And the man seated beside her had asked with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Headed to see family," she'd replied. "No, business trip." His brows rose. "Really? You don't look like the business type?" She remembered that sting even now. Small, sharp, invisible to anyone but her. But today, she had stood in front of hundreds of employees and reframed the whole narrative, not by force, not by anger, by truth. Her truth, and the truth of countless others who had walked similar paths. William's voice cut gently through her thoughts. "Miss Brooks, there's someone waiting for you at the office lobby. Said she didn't want to disturb your evening but hoped to speak with you for just a moment." Naomi straightened. "Who is it?" she said. "Her name is Clara Gaines." Naomi blinked, surprised. Clara, the flight attendant who had first shown her kindness. The one who brought water without judgment, who sensed something was wrong but didn't know how to intervene. "Let her wait," Naomi said gently. "I'll come down." The car turned around and headed back toward her office tower. Clara stood near the reception desk, hands clasped nervously, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She wore a simple navy coat, hair pulled back into a neat bun. When she saw Naomi walking toward her, she straightened too fast, nearly dropping her bag. "Miss Brooks," Clara said, voice small. "Thank you for seeing me. I didn't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," Naomi said warmly. "I'm glad you came." Clara exhaled, shoulders sinking in relief. I wanted to say thank you," she said, "for mentioning me in your report, for recognizing that I tried, for being kind even though you had every reason not to be. Naomi stepped closer. You didn't turn away, she said simply. That matters. Clara nodded, swallowing a wave of emotion. I joined the airline to help people, she whispered. But on your flight I felt frozen. I didn't know how to speak up without stepping out of line or making things worse. You spoke up when the moment counted, Naomi replied. Courage isn't about timing. It's about intention. Clara's eyes shimmered. I've been assigned to help with the new program, she said quietly. Training, mentorship, all of it. I want to do better for everyone who sits in those seats. Naomi smiled. You already are. Clara's breath caught her face, warming with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered again. For everything. As she turned to leave, Naomi called gently after her. Clara. She stopped, glancing back. You're part of the change that's coming, Naomi said. Don't forget that. Clara nodded and stepped into the night, the lobby doors closing softly behind her. William drove Naomi home, the city now glowing in full nighttime strength. The car glided smoothly through traffic until it reached her building, a tall, modern high-rise overlooking the river. Naomi stepped into her apartment, greeted by warm, dim lights and the soft hum of classical piano playing from her speakers, a habit she had set years ago to make evenings gentler. She placed her bag on the couch and walked to the kitchen island where a small stack of mail waited. Most were routine. Bills, invitations, a package from a publisher she occasionally worked with, but one envelope stood out. No return address, handwritten, soft cream paper. Something inside her instinctively knew who it was from. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet. Miss Brooks, I don't expect you to respond. I only hope you'll read this. I've spent the last few days thinking about the woman I was on that plane and the woman I want to become. What I did was rooted in fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of losing control. Fear of the stories I had absorbed without question. You showed me what courage looks like, not in confrontation but in composure. Thank you for treating me as a human being, even when I failed to treat you as one. I don't know where my path will go next, but I want it to begin with accountability. I hope someday, when our paths cross again, because life has a way of doing that, you will see the person I am trying to become. With sincerity, Rachel Miller. Naomi folded the letter slowly, thoughtfully. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel vindication. She felt something closer to peace. Not because everything was fixed, far from it, but because something had begun. A shift. A reckoning. A quiet transformation. She walked to her balcony and stepped outside. The night breeze brushed through her hair, cool and refreshing. The river shimmered below, reflecting the city's lights like scattered stars. She leaned on the railing, letting her mind drift gently. Her mother's voice echoed in her memories. The sky is not a limit, baby. It's a mirror. What you put into the world reflects back at you. Naomi smiled softly. She looked up. The sky above Manhattan was dark but wide, endless, ready for whatever story came next. And she knew the events of Flight 218 would ripple longer than anyone expected. In training manuals, in employee culture, in everyday moments where someone paused before acting on an unchecked assumption, change wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't immediate, it was steady, it was continuous. It was built through choices. Her choices, Rachel's choices, Clara's choices, the company's choices. And tonight Naomi allowed herself the smallest luxury: hope. Hope that the next time a woman who looked like her stepped onto a plane, she would take her seat, any seat she paid for without question. Hope that every passenger would be seen first as a person, not a story someone projected onto them, not a stereotype someone carried silently. Hope that dignity would become standard, normal, unremarkable. Because that's when true change would be complete, not when it made headlines but when it became ordinary. Naomi closed her eyes and breathed in the night air. Then she whispered to herself, her voice soft but certain, "The sky is rewritten," and she believed it. Naomi Brooks's story reminds us of something we all know, but not everyone is conscious enough to remember. Respect is not a privilege, it is a human right. With just one wrong look, one hasty decision, we can hurt others more deeply than we realize. But with just one moment of courage and one word at the right time, we can change the system, change the way others see each other. Especially for those who have experienced many years of life, older people who have seen enough ups and downs, this story has another layer of meaning. Growing up never stops. Whether we are 30 or 60, we can relearn correct mistakes and become better versions of ourselves. Naomi doesn't take revenge, she takes responsibility. And it's that calmness that changes people. The message is worth taking with us. Don't let silence fuel injustice, but don't let anger cloud your dignity. True strength lies in how you stand up calmly, understandingly, and firmly. And if this story touches you, leaves you with some thought, some warmth, or some new hope, I would like to send my most sincere thanks. Please like, share, and subscribe so that each story we share can continue to spread, heal, and remind each other that there is still much good in the world.